What's up again, everybody? Well, Everfest is officially out in the wild. People are opening it. We're having a great time. There are fables everywhere. I don't know if you thought the same thing, but fables I feel like are like sprinkling from the sky. And now that the set is fully revealed, we can go through each class, every card, and talk about the winners and the losers of this set. What class got the most tools? What class is still lacking? What got some interesting things, but maybe not so much powerful things? And that leads us to Brute. We're going to talk about Brute today. I'm going to go through every card that Brute got. Not every pitch value, but every individual card type or card name. And we'll talk about winners and losers within this. I'll even give them like a star ranking based on utility or playability or overall power or coolness. Let's start off with this card. Skull Crushers is the majestic arm equipment that blocks for 1 with Battle Worn and says whenever you roll a 5 or a 6 this turn, your Brute attacks gain +1 this turn. Whenever you roll a 1 on a die, destroy Skull Crushers. Okay, so this is an interesting card because at first glance you may be like, well, cool, this makes sense for Kyos. He rolls so many times. And that could be the case. That could be the case. But I feel also like Kyos overall is one of those heroes that, like, if he just hits a 5 or a 6, you're just going to kill your opponent on a 5 or a 6 on a single attack. So in a way it works for Kyos, and I do think it is pretty good for Kyos. In fact, I would probably play this over Gambler Gloves in Kyos because Gambler's Gloves in Kyos to me doesn't resonate the same way because you roll so many times that fixing one of those rolls, it's like whatever. At that point, I'm just gonna roll with the dice, and if I hit a 1 through 4, then so be it, because my attacks are forcing the rolls. In Levia and Rhinar, this seems interesting because if you hit a roll on Scabskin for like 5 or 6, then all of a sudden not only do you have extra action points, which you were hoping to use anyway for multiple large attacks, but you're also getting a buff here. And not only that, you're getting a buff on the weapons. So if you're using claws, you're getting a buff on claws. This seems like you could actually use it fairly decently in a different build version of Rhinar or Levia, one that you perhaps roll more than you normally would, using some of the cards from this set so that you can get incremental value on multiple attacks, maybe on 1 turn or on multiple turns over time. So overall, I would give this a middle of the road 3-star. The benefit here also is that this is block. You can block with this, and it's battle worn. So you block with it, it sits around, and you get value over the long term. And of course, it will destroy itself if you roll a 1. But overall, I give this like the middle ground 3-star. This card, Swing Big, is really big. Swing Big costs 2. It's the majestic Brute action attack. It attacks for 8 and it blocks for 3. And the block for 3 is like underratedly good because there are cards in Brute that don't block at all. A 2 for 8 just straight up on paper is really good. And then you look at the effect and you're like, it is a drawback effect. If Swing Big doesn't hit, the defending hero creates a quicken token when the combat chain closes, and you go, okay, that's actually terrible, right? Well, not really, because if you think about what your opponent has to do to avoid this hitting, it's a little harder than you think, because, like, yes, they could commit 1 2-block equipment plus 2 3-block cards, leaves them with a 2-card hand and maybe a card in their arsenal. If they do that, then they get a quicken token, but can they really make use of the quicken token on their turn with a 2-card hand and 1 in arsenal? Maybe, maybe not. And so the quicken token here, it feels like a little bit of a bait, and you're just getting the benefit of a 2 for 8, which is amazing coming from a 2-card hand. This card's incredible. I feel like this is a 5-star card, goes in like literally every Brute deck you ever build. I don't see why you wouldn't put this in because it is so incredibly solid. It works in Levia. If you end up banishing it from the graveyard, it turns things off. It works in Rhinar if you discard it or if you just play it straight up. And this is a fantastic arsenal card. You have this in your arsenal, you block maybe with 3 cards, you have 1 card in hand, you pitch it, and then you play the 8 attack from arsenal, and it just comes and smacks your opponent in the face. And if they let it push damage, great. It leaks. This also a great pummel card, right? Because you are only committing 2 resources to this. And so if you have like Tunic resource up and you pitch a blue for this, then you have the net 2 resources to play a pummel. And again, all of these things allow or are facilitated by the fact that you don't have a discard cost on this card to be paid, and that it only costs 2, and it's a 2 for 8. So this card's insanely good, a natural 5-star. Also a natural 5-star, but for a different reason, is Kyos Specialization Ready to Roll. Pitches blue, fantastic. Blocks 3, also fantastic. Costs nothing, fantastic. And if you would roll 1 or more dice this turn, instead roll that many dice plus 1 and ignore the lowest roll with the old go again at the end. This does everything you want it to do. Like Kyo wants to roll, or sometimes doesn't necessarily want to, is forced to roll. Kyo has to roll, and when you have to roll, having a second roll to mitigate the possibility of one of those two going bad is just, it's the uber nuts. It's perfect. I can't, like, how do you understate this card? It's so good. This is definitely very powerful. It's one that you always run. It takes your failure rate of rolling a single die and hitting a 1 through 4 at 66%, and it just like cuts that way down. In fact, I don't know the exact numbers. If you do, or if you know how to do the calculations while I'm just doing this off the cuff right here, put it down in the comments below. Tell me what the success rate is playing this card out and rolling 2 dice and taking the higher of the 2 results for hitting a 5 or a 6. This card's a 5-star. Rolling Thunder is a pretty solid card as well. Almost always this is just pure upside. If you hit the 1 on this, you're still getting a +1 buff. Rolling Thunder is a 1-cost brute action. It blocks for 3, again, a very good thing, that's something that blocks for 3, and it asks you to roll a 6-sided die. So this is something that you could put into all of the brutes and play for pure upside, and it would help trigger the Skull Crushers from earlier, so it does give you utility to play Skull Crushers. When you roll a 6-sided die, your next brute attack will gain +X, where X is the number you rolled. Go again. So again, if you roll a 1, you're still getting a buff. If you roll a 3, which is pretty average, you roll those, you're sitting there with a +3 buff. Those buffs, those cards that buff, have like an Intimidate connected to it. This doesn't necessarily have an Intimidate connected to it, but this does have the high roll possibility of hitting like a 5 or a 6, which is disgusting, disturbing, and altogether fantastic. So this card, I would give a nice little 4-star because you do have upside in every deck, and every hero, and every sort of archetype. The question becomes, do you play this over, you know, like one of those other cards, and is there enough room? I think you could probably make room for this, and you're comfortable playing this out there because you don't have a downside to the roll. High Roller, continuing with the roll mechanics, and I will say this, I think overall Brute did get a little bit of the short end of the stick with this set, because there are people that are like, I don't want to have to rely on another form of variance or more rolling and more variance for my deck, but I do think that from a thematic and archetypal sense, this is really fun, and it actually makes me want to play Brute more, because I don't play Brute very much, but I love the idea of just jamming out some rolls and rolling them out and seeing what crazy things can happen. So kudos in that sense to creating something that is pulling me into wanting to play a class I don't normally play. High Roller is a rare. It is a cycle, and this is the red. It costs nothing. It blocks for 3. It intimidates when you play it. So even base level, if you just play the card, you are getting a benefit, Intimidate. But if you roll a 4, 5, or 6 on any die this turn, you Intimidate twice, which is interesting. So this is basically just like take a card from your opponent's hand for a spell, for a time. But also the upside of if you're building in roll mechanics into your deck, then this has a secondary upside. So it also encourages you to roll like Scab Skin Leathers or Barkbone Strapping or things like that. Are you going to hit this very often? You're playing the red too in order to hit this. The yellow has to have a 5 or a 6, and the blue has to hit a 6. So the blue is very tough to hit. I love this card thematically, but I don't love this card as far as like jamming a bunch of them into your deck. I'd give this a 2-star overall, but I may bump that up for Kyo because he does roll so much compared to the other two. So maybe a 3-star if you're playing this in Kyo. Bare Fangs. Bare Fangs doesn't block for anything, and this is one of the detriments to the card, but it is a 2 for 6 on red, which is important to note because this is a common and it cycles, so the blue is a 4 attack and costs 2. When you attack with Bare Fangs, draw a card and discard a card. If a card with 6 or more attack is discarded this way, it gains +2. So the red pushes to 8, the blue pushes to 6, which is pretty good, and it does make me want to consider running the blue. The yellow's that odd man out because it pushes to 7, and 7 is an interesting breakpoint, but not exactly one that is often explored in Brute, I would say. But if you do push 7 with the yellow, which the yellow pitches 2, of course. If you do push 7 with yellow, that is pretty nice. The big detriment to this card is the fact that it doesn't block for anything, and that again is one of those scenarios in Brute, one of those things that keeps popping up that you have to weigh and consider. And I have lost a fair bit of games as Brute just not being able to block because of cards like this. I'd give this one a 2-star overall, but I'd like to know your comments down below and your ratings for this card down below, because I feel like this one could teeter back and forth. It's pure damage, and that's like, I guess, okay, so that's why I trended to 2-star, but I'd be curious to see what you think. Final card, and this one is a spicy one. Wild Ride, a 2 for 6, but doesn't block. Comes in a cycle, and it says when you attack with Wild Ride, draw a card, then discard a random card. If the card with 6 or more attack is discarded, this gains Go Again. I think this card's a 4-star card, and even though it doesn't block, I think this card naturally, Wild Ride just naturally fits in a lot of Brute synergies and archetypes, because you don't have to roll Scab Skin Leathers to get the second action point when you play Wild Ride. You just have to play it. You just play the card out there and hit a 6. So it rewards your deck building, which you're already doing. You're already angling towards those 6 attacks, and I feel like you're always playing the red here because the red is 6 with Go Again. Very threatening overall. So I think this card's a 4-star card. I think this is one of the better cards in the set. The big downside, of course, is that it blocks for 0, and in fact it doesn't even block for 0, it blocks for nothing, so you can't modify the 0 there, which is unfortunate for it. Oh wait, I'm over here sitting here thinking I forgot about Bad Beats. Bad Beats, whoops, Bad Beats costs nothing, and it's a Brute action, blocks for 3. It says roll a 6-sided die. If you're playing the red one, if the number rolled is 4, 5, or 6, then you give +5 to your next attack. Action card. I want to make that very clear because it doesn't buff weapons, which is really sad, but that's okay because you do get Go Again off this, and +5 is nothing to scoff at. I do believe that on this one, the yellow and the blue modify the 4, 5, or 6 part, and so in that instance, you would have to, on the blue, you'd have to only roll a 6. Otherwise, this is a do-nothing card, and that feels really bad. Yeah, it looks like the blue only modifies the die roll. I don't like this. I don't like it because the red makes sense. It's a 50-50 on a die roll prior to this, and then you get a +5 buff. But if you miss the die roll, this is a do-nothing card. Now, at least it blocks for 3. That's a benefit, but like you're also having to choose to put the red into your deck, which is changing your distribution of resource cards. And that is also very scary. So maybe this works in Kyo, but I don't see myself jamming a bunch of these into decks because you are basically just requiring yourself to hit one of those rolls. Otherwise, it doesn't do anything. You compare this to High Roller, which had the same stipulation, but at least it had Intimidate printed on a card. And in that respect, I feel like it was better. This I don't love, and I would give like a 1-star. Maybe you make it work in a deck. I don't know. Put it in the comments below if you think I'm wrong. Overall, I will say this. I do think Brute could have gotten some more powerful effects, more powerful cards, but there are things in this set that I think thematically I really want to play with. And so it's this weird dichotomy of like, I like the mechanics of like the theme and what fun that you can have with it, with rolling dice and seeing what happens, and you high rolled and it's like, whoa, this is crazy. But then at the same time, from a competitive standpoint, if you're really trying to like go to armories and play this and be consistent, you lose a bit of the consistency. And the game overall is a very consistent game based on the mechanics, overarching mechanics in Flesh and Blood. And so I can understand when when someone feels frustrated because all of a sudden this specific class isn't as consistent because of die roll mechanics. So maybe there's a way to thread the line to find the consistency and then find the fun theme of it. I know what I will do with Brute as I build decks for all the classes and maybe play all the classes. I will build a high roll deck because I will very much want to try just rolling crazily and getting that on camera because I think it would be hilarious. If you enjoyed this video, you can always make the number go to the number. It's a very Brute thing to do, to smash one thing into another. It makes perfect sense. And if you want to see how Guardian fared in this set, check the video over there, on the screen over there. As always, everybody, thanks for watching.